So this is Chapter 8, Project Nephilim, Cosmic Orgasm, and the Strange Fate of Charles Thompson. Chapter 8. Outside of the hospital, I get a cab and head home. As we depart, my phone begins to ring. To my surprise, it's my contact in Washington, a senator by the name of Frank Burgess, a former civil rights attorney who's been fighting against the establishment, airing out their dirty laundry for over 4 decades now. For those of you unfamiliar with the senator's political history, it goes a little something like this. Burgess first won his seat in the Senate back in the 80s, defeating by a landslide his former defense attorney who had made a fortune representing big oil. At the time, gas prices had been at an all-time high, and a huge oil spill had just happened in the Gulf Coast. So this unfortunate chain of events inevitably led to that former defense attorney's demise in the political sense, and the fact that he was just another crook not concerned for the well-being of the country's voters was obvious. Now, since Burgess's ascension into the slippery dimensions of Congress, he has been widely hated by corporate America as well as his fellow associates in Congress, mainly because he has never accepted any money from lobbyists, and he's yet to vote yes to any law that would benefit big business. In my perspective, Senator Burgess is one of the last real patriots left in politics and also a firm believer in the cause. He advises me to come out to the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. He also relates to me he's been investigating into some things that Harold Johnson first leaked to him, which probably was the reason for his death. I direct the cab driver to the Ritz-Carlton and meet Frank at the designated location. Once there, Frank tells me that he has information of a highly classified nature. It seems that the reason I was hospitalized was because I got too deep into a secret government project by the name of Nephilim, an operation that a cabal of millionaires had implemented to raise a race of superior beings in a plot to take over the world. These superior beings were the offspring of a group of extraterrestrial biological entities who had crashed their spacecraft into the mountains in northern Oregon some time ago and have been impregnating abducted escorts and strippers since their arrival. I tell him I have no recollection of any of this. He explains the reason for this is because while I was at the hospital, they used this new obscure technology to erase parts of my memory. He further explains the deputy director was in on this and is currently under investigation. Also that the secret base was raided, but that the extraterrestrial biological entities had committed suicide before the authorities got to them, and that they had captured these Nephilim kids, but that they had been transferred to a black site and are further being investigated. Also that the women were released, but many of them are being treated for radiation poisoning and sexually transmitted diseases that are currently unknown to science, apparently from the interactions with the extraterrestrials. Lastly, he gives me his condolences about the professor and tells me how he was such a big contribution to the cause. Before we depart from each other, he advises me to meet with a hippie shaman who stays in the mountains of Northern California. He tells me he will help me to regain my memory and explains this is necessary before we make our next move. After saying this, I notice a big goofy grin on his face, and I can only speculate as to why, but I'm sure I can connect the dots, being that a government official is directing me to meet with a hippie shaman in the same mountains where massive amounts of marijuana is harvested on a regular basis, and who knows, except God, what else. Soon after this conversation, I depart, and like a good soldier, oblige and take the first flight out to North Cal. And I was seeing changes. On the edge of a mountain, somewhere on the dry forest of Northern California, I reach a gate with signs of a skeleton strumming away at a guitar. Within moments, I hear the sound of Jerry Garcia's voice telling me that if I'm a friend of the devil, then I'm a friend of his. Accompanying this song is a man of obese stature with long dreadlocks down to his feet driving a four-wheeler. It appears the man is mostly naked with only some small tie-dye covers over his front and back private regions. He introduces himself as Bob and invites me to hop on into his ride, and off we go. Through a trail on the edge of a mountain, we reach what appears to be a gigantic marijuana farm with what looks like hundreds of marijuana plants in individual raised beds, so big in stature from being fed organic chemicals they have become the size of trees, probably around 14 feet in height. There's no house to accompany the forest of herbal medicine, just a couple of teepees, a well, and some generators. As we get closer, I notice there's a circle of naked hippies just sitting around each other meditating. As Bob parks the four-wheeler, he reaches his hand out in front of me and says, "Take this. You'll need it for this to work." From experience, I know the little square tab he has in his hand is LSD. I ingest the intoxicant, then he hands me a bottle of rum and says, "You may want to keep this handy." By now the sun is set, and on top of this mountain you can see every single one of the constellations in the sky. They're emanating so bright right above us, it's almost as if you could reach up into the sky and grab them. After a short walk, we take a seat amongst the naked hippie circle. That's when Bob drops his coverings and joins the circle, as do I. At first, I felt a little uncomfortable sitting naked in front of all these strangers, but as I gazed at the nudity all around me, I started to realize the beauty of how everyone was attempting to become one with nature just as naked as the day they came into this world. Then the acid kicked in and I took a swig of the rum. I noticed this cute little dready sitting across from me with a bunch of psychedelic tattoos and deep meditation. Not to sound like a pig, but at the current moment in time, all I could do was hyper-focus on these dirty thoughts of what she would look like with me thrusting away at her repeatedly. Then it happened. Everyone in the circle began to masturbate. It was so bizarre. I mean, all of these naked hippie women massaging their clitorises and the hippie men stroking away at themselves in synchronicity. As I continued to stare at the little dready across from me, I started to become erect and figured when in Rome, so I followed their lead. As masturbation usually doesn't last more than a couple of minutes, the climax inevitably soon ensued. It felt kind of ridiculous, all of us just going to town on ourselves, but for some reason I couldn't stop hammering away at myself as I looked at the beautiful dready goddess in front of me, flicking herself back and forth. In this strange moment in time, I realized that men and women, all we really are just a bunch of primitive animals in nature, seeking one way or another some form of gratification, preferably instant. Hence, how we find ourselves in this current predicament. Not long after this existential realization, the moans and the increase in stroke and rubbing speed pronounced the climaxing fruit of our labor. In a matter of seconds, the orgasmic juices from all the participants began to spew, including myself, and that's when I heard, in the distance, the psychedelic funky sound of the dead playing, I believe, Fire on the Mountain. I noticed one of the huge marijuana trees take the shape of a heavy-set man with a beard and shaggy hair, strumming away on his guitar. Then they shape-shifted into a male and female humans. Shortly after, one of the branches began to extend from the male and insert itself into the female and repeatedly thrust itself into its counterpart. I now find myself hovering over myself as the hippies were doing the same. Then I noticed the cute little dready's astral body staring at me with desire filled in her eyes, and it began. We both took the shape of lions and commenced to wrestle and nibble on each other until she conceded to let me enter into her holy of holies. As we indulged in our most carnal desires, I noticed the others were doing the same in the shape of other animals. All around, bears, cheetahs, and even elephants were roaring as they hammered away at their partners. As this was going on, I noticed Bob floating around with what looked like a camera, filming the escapade as he made animal noises and gestures. Well, I guess it makes sense that he's the director of this animal orgy that we have found ourselves in, being that it's his show. What a strange trip. A hippie shaman astro porno director. Thanks, Uncle Sam, for being so generous as to covering my tab for this animalistic sexcapade. Not too long after it began, it ended, and I proclaimed a loud roar as the climax ensued, declaring that I was in fact the king of the jungle and found myself back into my body as one by one the hippies did as well. By this point, I was just kind of at a loss of words, being how this experience was sort of ineffable, and to truly understand it, you would have to experience it for yourself. As I was meditating on my thoughts, I realized that the scenes from my suppressed past had managed to come back to me and my destiny had become clear. I remembered everything, from breaking into the secret bunker to seeing the small green creature with the enormous anomaly for a head copulating with the abducted hooker, to the professor's death, all the way up to when the deputy director had me tasered and drugged. As these images of my descent into Project Nephilim became evident to me, the screeching sound of a kitten wailed in the distance. I looked over at the little dready and noticed her eyes became engulfed with rage, and with almost cat-like reflexes, she sprang into the woods. Shortly after, the sound of a man screaming blared from those woods, so I decided to check on what was going on. After a short venture through Mother Nature, I saw the dready back in her cat-like state, just gnawing away at a dead man, ripping away at him one bite at a time. There was also a deceased black cat next to them. I quickly put it together and understood that animalistic sense of a mother protecting her children. Then I looked at the man's face and noted it was the assassin. Serves him right, that piece of shit. Not only did you kill my most cherished friend, but what kind of a man kills an innocent little kitty? Looks like this is just another example of what you put out into the universe comes back, whether it be good or bad. You must have come here in an attempt to finish me off. Well, not today. Now I don't know if what I saw and experienced here today is for the better but it definitely has altered my perception on reality. As I continued to meditate on my thoughts, the dready or cat-like state continued to feast on the assailant, and as I watched, all I could conjure up in my head was, what a good kitty. Yes, she is.